Tonight we talk about the romantic adventures of Casanova. You can almost hear the gondolas whispering through moonlit canals, smell the candle wax in a crowded salon, and feel the sly grin forming as someone across the table dares you to play one more hand. This isn't just another history lesson, it's a confession dressed in velvet. You're about to trace the footsteps of Giacomo Casanova, the Venetian whose name became shorthand for seduction itself. But beneath that legend lies a restless, brilliant, sometimes ridiculous man. You probably won't survive this century-spanning romp with your cynicism intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in Venice, 1725. The city sways gently on its lagoon, equal parts perfume and decay. Born to an actress mother and a dancer father, little Giacomo learns early that applause can be as nourishing as bread. The theaters of Venice are his playground, masked faces, whispered plots, the shimmer of oil lamps reflecting on polished floors. You, following his small steps, can almost taste the chaos that will one day become charm. But his health is fragile. A mysterious childhood illness nearly claims him, and his grandmother hauls him to a mountain village where the air is cleaner and the church bells softer. There, between Latin prayers and herbal remedies, he learns that survival often requires reinvention. Historians still argue whether that near-death experience made him a cynic or a dreamer. By 10, he's already fluent in the art of mimicry. Priests adore his quick wit. Noble ladies pinch his cheeks and whisper, "Che bello ragazzo." He soaks up attention like wine into silk. You can sense the city shaping him the way Venice herself pretends respectability, while hiding scandal under every balcony. That dual nature becomes his native tongue. His mother's troupe moves constantly, leaving him to tutors and boarding schools. In the classrooms of Padua, surrounded by ink-smudged boys reciting Virgil, Casanova discovers that intellect can be as seductive as beauty. He devours philosophy, mathematics, and law. He learns fencing because, as he'll later prove, knowing how to parry words and blades is equally useful at parties. One evening, you picture him sneaking out with fellow students to watch fireworks over the lagoon. They toss coins into the water, making wishes. Casanova's, you suspect, isn't for wealth or fame. It's for freedom. Already, rules feel like ropes around his clever wrists. There's a story, one of those fringe tidbits historians chuckle over, that he once made a love potion out of cocoa, ambergris, and ground pearl for a classmate's hopeless crush. Whether it worked or not, we'll never know, but it shows you where his curiosity was leading. He's not yet the great lover. He's an experimenter chasing reactions. Venetian society is small, but hungry for gossip. The Republic's watchdogs, those dour gray-robed inquisitors, monitor everything: speech, gambling, even laughter that sounds too foreign. Still, Carnival offers a loophole. Masks come out, and for a few weeks, identity becomes optional. Casanova, barely in his teens, slips into those parties like a natural-born phantom. The scent-spiced wine, powdered wigs, and river damp mix into something intoxicating. He'll later claim his first kiss came during such a masquerade, behind a pillar, from a girl whose name he forgot by dawn. True or not, it fits the pattern: fleeting pleasure, permanent memory. By the time you leave this first act of his life, Venice feels smaller, as though its marble bridges can't contain him. He's learned the thrill of pretending, the safety of charm, and the weakness of authority. Every lesson will follow him across Europe, glittering and dangerous as Venetian glass. You're standing now in Padua, the crisp air full of the smell of ink and hot wax. Casanova is 16, already taller than most of his classmates, with the self-assured grin of someone who's been praised too often and punished too rarely. He's officially studying for the priesthood because in Venice, the church offers both education and a convenient loophole for ambitious boys without family wealth. But you can sense how uneasy he feels in the cassock, like an actor wearing the wrong costume. The lectures drone on about sin and salvation, and you can almost see him stifling yawns while doodling hearts in the margins of his Latin notes. Beneath the robes and rituals, he's fascinated not by theology, but by theater, the gestures, the power of performance. When the preacher raises a trembling hand to the heavens, Casanova studies it like choreography. Later, he'll confess that faith never thrilled him as much as the sight of an audience leaning forward. Historians still argue whether he ever truly believed in anything beyond the pursuit of delight. Some call him faithless. Others see him as a mystic in disguise, a man chasing divine ecstasy through earthly pleasures. You'll have to decide for yourself. During these years, his first real flirtations bloom. There's a nobleman's daughter who finds excuses to seek moral advice from the young seminarian. There's a widow who lends him philosophy books and an occasional glance that lasts too long. Casanova starts to test his powers, not cruelty, just curiosity. What words make people lean closer? Which smiles open doors? A quirky record from Padua's archives tells of a night when he and a group of friends were caught performing mock exorcisms in the dormitory, using Latin chants and candlelight. It was half joke, half drama, and entirely inappropriate. The rector was furious, but the students adored it. It was his first taste of scandal and applause. Money, however, remains a problem. His family's fortunes are slim, and he survives on borrowed ducats and clever talk. He learns the gambler's posture, relaxed shoulders, quick eyes, a readiness to bluff. You can almost feel him practicing it before a mirror, adjusting his smile until it disarms suspicion. The card table becomes his secondary classroom. The stakes are lessons in psychology. Then comes the first big test of charm versus consequence. He meets a senator's mistress, older and vastly more experienced. The affair is brief but formative. She teaches him not just the rhythms of seduction, but the politics of it, the invisible lines you mustn't cross. When she's abruptly sent away, Casanova receives no warning, only the icy silence of scandal. He learns that desire, like fire, offers warmth until someone notices the smoke. Disillusioned but undeterred, he shifts toward law and philosophy. The more he reads Voltaire, Molière, and obscure treatises on alchemy, the more he craves life outside the classroom. Venice calls him back, its canals promising anonymity and danger. By now, he can quote scripture and Aristotle with equal flair, which makes him both charming and vaguely suspicious. Back home, his clerical robes are exchanged for silks borrowed from richer friends. He frequents salons, plays the violin, and finds work tutoring noble sons who learn little and pay late. His magnetism attracts patrons. One of them, the aging Senator Bragadin, takes a curious liking to him after Casanova supposedly saves his life through a spontaneous healing ritual. Historians still argue whether it was coincidence or clever manipulation, but either way, it lands him a patron, a home, and the start of real social mobility. Picture him now gliding through the Grand Canal in Bragadin's gondola, the city lights shimmering on the water. The boy who once studied Latin prayers now debates philosophy with cardinals, trades jokes with courtesans, and plays violin in candlelit rooms thick with perfume and laughter. Every evening feels like the start of a legend, though he doesn't know yet how quickly legends can turn against you. You can almost hear him whisper it to himself. Somewhere between ambition and warning, life rewards the daring, but only until it doesn't. The city hums like a stage about to lift its curtain. You follow Casanova as he strolls through Venice, 20-something now, draped in satin confidence and the faint scent of risk. His reputation is growing too quickly for comfort. The priests whisper that he's vain, gamblers call him lucky, and women describe him with that dangerous mix of admiration and warning. You can almost hear the rustle of gossip trailing behind every footstep. That he lives by improvisation. Today a scholar, tomorrow a violinist. The next week a magician's apprentice, whatever fits the costume of opportunity. Yet his debts multiply faster than his admirers. You can imagine the pile of IOS on his desk, each one a love letter written to misfortune. One evening, at a glittering ball, Casanova's charm collides with pride. A rival, one of those powdered, peacockish noblemen, makes an offhand insult about his humble birth. The air tightens. Casanova, unable to let the insult pass, challenges him to a duel. Historians still argue whether he actually killed the man or merely wounded him. But either version ends with him on the wrong side of Venice's laws. He flees before dawn, slipping through alleys that still smell of wet stone and river salt. The gondoliers gossip, the dogs' guards spread the word, and you can feel the city turning its elegant back on him. Exile becomes his first real adventure. Casanova wanders north into the Italian countryside, then across borders that feel more like moods than lines on a map. He sells tarot readings to farmers, plays violin in taverns, even works as a tutor for a while. Always the same rhythm. He arrives broke, charms the locals, leaves richer or at least forgiven. There's a curious footnote here, one of those fringe anecdotes historians adore. In Parma, it's said he briefly joined a traveling troupe of acrobats after saving their ringleader's daughter from a drunken soldier. Whether true or theatrical exaggeration, it fits perfectly. The ex-priest turned performer, suspended between intellect and mischief. By the time he reaches Milan, Casanova is reinvented again, this time as a man of letters. He reads the classics aloud in smoky salons, turning Virgil into flirtation. Patrons begin to notice him, though not all for the right reasons. He wins money at cards too often. Some think and keeps winning favors from people best left unmentioned. But behind the polished laughter, loneliness gnaws at him. He writes to friends back in Venice, begging news, promising to return once the scandal cools. It's that strange ache of the wanderer, the thrill of motion laced with homesickness. You might recognize it yourself, the way adventure feels sweetest just before regret arrives. Still, he refuses to stay quiet. In Genoa, he's arrested briefly for blasphemy after joking that saints would make poor poker players. He's released thanks to his charm, of course, but he learns a crucial lesson. Wit can open doors, but it can also mark you for observation. By now, Casanova has tasted the geography of Europe through its women and wagers. He writes down fragments of each encounter, names, smells, the shape of laughter in different languages. Later, those notes will become the story of my life. But for now, they're just survival, a diary of self-preservation through pleasure. When he finally sneaks back into Venice months later under a false name, he's changed. The duelist's arrogance is softened, replaced by something sharper, strategy. He moves carefully through the city, avoiding old enemies and old lovers alike, even as he sits at Bragadin's table again, sipping sweet wine. You can sense that restless energy, still fizzing under his calm surface. Venice forgives him, but never forgets. The eyes of the Inquisition follow him from behind every carved mask. The next scandal, they suspect, is only a heartbeat away, and in a city where reputation is currency. Casanova has already begun to spend faster than he earns. You hear the heavy creak of iron doors before you see him. Casanova, once the darling of salons and masquerades, now sits in a stone cell beneath the Dog's Palace, the infamous Piombi, named for their blistering lead roofs. It's 1755, and the air is thick enough to chew. He's been arrested without trial, accused of atheism, witchcraft, and moral corruption, Venetian shorthand for too clever, too free, and too admired. The guards strip him of silk and status, leaving only the humbling scratch of coarse linen. You can almost feel the sweat rolling down his spine as he looks up at the low ceiling, each metal plate groaning in the heat. Historians still argue whether he was truly guilty of heresy, or merely too entertaining for his own good. Either way, the inquisitors decide that Venice needs a break from Casanova. He spends his first nights counting heartbeats, swatting fleas, and replaying every reckless conversation that might have doomed him. Too many words, he mutters. Too many listeners. It's the first time his gift for talk becomes a trap. But even here, behind iron bars, his mind refuses to stay caged. There's a guard named Lorenzo who sneaks him extra candles, half out of pity, half because Casanova makes him laugh. By flickering light, he begins to write spells, stories, nonsense, anything to prove that imagination is still free. One morning, he uses ink mixed with soot and wine to draw tarot symbols on scraps of paper. When another prisoner asks what they mean, Casanova grins. Hope, he says, in disguise. Then, one night, a whisper curls through the cell block. Escape. The legend begins. He studies the walls, listens for guard rotations, measures time by footsteps. Using a shard of marble, he pries loose bits of lead from the roof, hiding them beneath straw mats. The labor takes months, sweat mixing with dust until his hands bleed. When the guards question him, he fakes illness, rolling in his own filth to sell the lie. It's grotesque but effective. A quirky tidbit from his later memoir claims he used a metal spike hidden in a Bible to dig through the ceiling, praying as he worked. Whether that's poetic license or pure bravado, no one can confirm. But one dawn in 1756, Casanova does the impossible. He and a fellow inmate crawl through a hole in the roof, cross the rafters under a sky the color of pewter, and break into the attic above the Inquisition's library. You almost hold your breath with them as they creep past ancient manuscripts and sleeping guards. The escape unfolds like theater Venetian irony at its finest. From condemned heretic to rooftop acrobat, he descends through trapdoors, unlocking doors with stolen keys, until finally he stands in a courtyard washed with moonlight. His feet touch freedom again. For the first time in months, he smells the lagoon salt, rot, and redemption. By sunrise, he's gone, disguised as a monk and ferried across the water by a gondolier who doesn't dare ask questions. Historians still debate how much was luck and how much was orchestration, but every version agrees no one had ever escaped the Piombi before. That morning, as the bells of San Marco toll, you picture him walking quickly, not daring to look back. He's bruised, filthy, and grinning like a man reborn. Every sound, every gull cry, every splash of ore feels like applause. Later, when he tells the story across Europe, the details grow wilder, the coded messages, the stolen tools, the divine intervention. But the essence remains the caged intellect refusing surrender. It becomes his passport to immortality. The prisoner of the Doge is gone. In his place stands a myth in the making. And as Venice wakes, realizing its walls have been mocked, Casanova is already halfway to Paris, ready to turn prison bars into punchlines at his next dinner party. You travel with him now through the heart of 18th century Europe, the road dust rising behind his carriage like smoke from a magician's trick. Casanova, freshly escaped and newly infamous, reinvents himself once again not as a fugitive, but as a philosopher, a nobleman, a man of refined mystery. The Europe of his day is a patchwork of courts, salons, and gambling dens, each one a stage waiting for his entrance. Paris is his first great audience. Imagine the chandeliers of Versailles, their crystals flickering like frozen fireworks. He walks in wearing borrowed finery, pockets almost empty. But his stories, especially that legendary prison escape, buy him entry to every room. People crave danger wrapped in silk, and Casanova delivers it with a bow. He befriends intellectuals, seduces noble women, and talks his way into circles where accent and confidence matter more than pedigree. Voltaire himself supposedly meets him once, amused by this Venetian with the silver tongue. Historians still argue whether the meeting truly happened, but the image of Casanova debating philosophy while eyeing a duchess across the room feels too perfect to dismiss. France, though, is expensive fun. He gambles his winnings away at card tables lined with powdered wigs and painted smiles. The clink of coins, the scent of wine, the flick of fans, it's all theater. And he plays his part beautifully. You can almost hear his soft laugh when he wins, and his polite shrug when he loses. Money, to him, is only another illusion useful for the game, meaningless when the night is over. A quirky but verified detail from his time in Paris: Casanova briefly worked as a spy for the French government, helping to monitor foreign diplomats. He filed meticulous reports in flawless handwriting, though whether he was loyal or just enjoying the intrigue is anyone's guess. That duality, half patriot, half opportunist, will follow him everywhere. From Paris, he drifts to Dresden, then to Vienna, where the music of Mozart's youth fills the air. Each city welcomes him like a comet, brilliant, brief, and a little dangerous. In Dresden, he meets an alchemist who claims to turn mercury into gold. Casanova, ever the enthusiast for secrets, funds the experiment for weeks before realizing he's been duped. He laughs it off. Better to lose to wonder than win with boredom, he quips, a line that could serve as his personal scripture. And then, amid the glitter, he falls in love, or what passes for it in his restless vocabulary. A woman named Henriette, clever, graceful, as witty as he is reckless. Their affair becomes a duet of disguises and escapes. A love story written in hotel ledgers and carriage dust. Historians still debate her identity. Some say she was French nobility, others that she was a spy. Casanova calls her the only woman who ever truly left him heartbroken. When she vanishes one morning, leaving only a note, you can almost feel him staring at it, unsure whether to smile or curse. From that loss grows a strange maturity. He still seduces and gambles, of course, but now there's a tinge of melancholy under the laughter. He starts to write essays, half-serious treatises on magic, science, and human folly. In one, he claims that love is merely curiosity prolonged. Maybe he's joking, maybe not. Yet even his reflections can't keep him grounded. A debt here, a jealous husband there. Europe is both playground and minefield. He's chased from one city, pardoned in another. Each near disaster becomes a new anecdote for the next audience. You realize he's addicted not to pleasure itself, but to motion, to staying one step ahead of boredom and consequence alike. And so the roads keep unspooling before him, lit by torches and laughter. You can almost see him in silhouette against the Alps, cloak billowing, the eternal traveler writing himself into history one scandal at a time. You find him now in a Paris salon again, a little older, the curls of his wig powdered just enough to hide the creeping gray. Casanova leans over a green baize table, fingers resting lightly on the deck. Cards flutter, coins chime, and the air hums with the low murmur of calculated risk. To him, the gaming table is an altar, part mathematics, part theater, and entirely alive. He plays not only for money but for rhythm, for that exquisite instant when chance and charm synchronize. By now, he's learned how to read people the way a scholar reads ancient texts. The nervous tapping of a ring, the twitch of an eyelid, these are tells, footnotes to the soul. When he wins beautifully, offering his opponents compliments so elegant they sound like apologies. When he loses, which is often enough, he loses theatrically, a tragic hero undone by luck rather than greed. You can almost see the women watching him from the edges of the room, captivated less by his fortune than by his poise. He starts to write during the quiet hours after the dice stop rolling. Pages pile up, reflections, jokes, half-remembered philosophies. He drafts letters to women he'll never send, and essays about pleasure that he pretends are moral treatises. It's here that the writer begins to bloom inside the gambler. Historians still argue whether he truly saw himself as an author, or simply as a performer using ink instead of applause. Money, as usual, slips through his fingers. One week he's flush enough to buy a carriage, the next he's pawning the wheels. He tries his hand at new ventures, alchemy, stock trading, even a scheme involving a magic lottery. A quirky detail from his Paris years tells of how he attempted to finance an expedition to extract mercury from Mount Vesuvius, claiming divine inspiration. It failed spectacularly, but the investors forgave him after he threw them a lavish dinner. Somehow, charm always converts disaster into anecdote. Still, a shadow begins to form. The salons start to change. The Enlightenment is no longer just witty conversation, but revolution in embryo. Philosophers talk about equality, skepticism, and reason. Casanova listens, nodding, but you can feel him drifting slightly out of sync. The man who once mocked superstition now finds comfort in tarot and fate again, as if clinging to old enchantments while the world modernizes beneath his feet. He returns briefly to Venice under amnesty, craving familiarity. The city greets him like an ex-lover, fond, wary, and faintly amused. He plays the violin in small gatherings, recites poetry, and writes pamphlets defending his past escapades with mock seriousness. But Venice has aged, too. The masks feel heavier, the canals quieter. He senses that the stage he once owned is shrinking. In his letters from this period, you find a hint of fatigue. To live long, he writes, one must die often. He's speaking of reinvention, but also of loss. The faces around him change faster than he can charm them. His old patron Bragadin dies, leaving him without a steady protector. Once more, he must wander. He travels east to Prague, Vienna, Warsaw, cities where his reputation arrives before he does, half fact, half laughter. In Poland, he gains favor at court by teaching the king a new card game. In Vienna, he narrowly avoids a duel after joking about an officer's wig. Every border crossing is both exile and invitation, yet amid the gambling and gallantry, he writes more seriously. He begins compiling notes for a great work, part confession, part chronicle, part defense. He doesn't know it yet, but those fragments will evolve into his memoirs. Maybe he senses that fortune, like youth, must eventually be documented before it vanishes. As the century turns toward stormier skies, Casanova still moves through it with the unhurried grace of a man, pretending not to hear time's footsteps. Cards, quills, lovers, all his familiar companions remain, though each feels a little heavier in his hand. You follow him now into the grand corridors of Europe's elite, the velvet-lined courts, and candlelit chambers where gossip is currency and seduction, a form of diplomacy. Casanova moves through them as if born to it, though he's still that self-made Venetian under the powdered fouet. His smile bridges languages, his curiosity erases class. In every city, he finds a patron or a paramour, sometimes both in the same evening. By the late 1750s, his reputation as both lover and raconteur precedes him. He's rumored to have dined with princes, danced with duchesses, and debated with philosophers. In London, he charms a noblewoman so thoroughly that her jealous husband hires spies to follow him. In Dresden, he claims to have advised ministers on political intrigue while simultaneously teaching their wives the art of conversation. Historians still argue whether half of these tales are true or self-promotion, but you can't deny their sparkle. One affair, however, stands out among the hundreds whispered about him. In Paris, he meets a young courtesan known as La Charpelon, bold, intelligent, and utterly uninterested in his usual tricks. The chase drives him to distraction. He writes letters, composes verses, and even feigns illness to lure her pity. But she toys with him, turning the master manipulator into the fool. When she finally rejects him publicly, Casanova spirals into despair so deep he attempts suicide. It's a rare crack in his mask, a moment when you glimpse the man beneath the myth-sensitive. Humiliated, human. He survives, of course, and in typical Casanova fashion, turns even that failure into a story. At a dinner party weeks later, he jokes, "I only tried to die to prove I could." Laughter restores what pride had lost. Still, a quiet note enters his tone, a trace of self-awareness that will never quite fade. His travels continue. In Vienna, he crosses paths with Empress Maria Theresa's court and flirts dangerously close to scandal. In Russia, he meets Catherine the Great's ministers, trading ideas about enlightenment and chemistry. He even claims to have impressed the Empress herself with his wit, though historians remain politely skeptical. The more he embellishes, the more Europe believes. After all, a good lie well told can become a cultural truth. A quirky tidbit from this era: Casanova once collaborated with a stage magician to perform a séance for a noble audience, using phosphorus and hidden wires to make spirits appear. When a candle tipped and nearly set the drapes ablaze, he salvaged the disaster by declaring, "The afterlife objects to such cheap tricks." The crowd applauded. For him, disaster was always just unpolished theater. By now, he's middle-aged, but still magnetic. His hair is thinning, his waist expanding, yet his confidence remains ageless. Younger lovers see in him not just experience but legend. Each affair feeds his writing. Each heartbreak becomes material. He begins to understand that his true immortality won't come from conquests, but from storytelling. Still, he can't resist the performance of romance. In one of his letters, he muses, "To seduce is to study the soul with pleasure." That line alone could summarize his philosophy: half scholar, half hedonist. But the world around him is changing. Enlightenment ideals give way to revolutions, and the glittering aristocracy that once adored him begins to crumble. He senses it, though he won't admit it aloud. The salons grow emptier, the laughter more brittle, and yet he keeps dancing, keeps charming, as if sheer will could hold the century in place. You can almost see him raising a glass to the fading candlelight, whispering, "One more night," before reason spoils the dream. Casanova's greatest adventure was never simply romantic, it was existential. In every affair, every duel, every escape, he chased not a woman, but the feeling of being fully alive. And though historians still argue whether passion or performance truly drove him, You begin to suspect they were never separate at all. You can sense the tide shifting beneath his polished shoes. The Europe that once welcomed Casanova with open arms now greets him with polite suspicion. The witty libertine, once celebrated, begins to feel like a relic. Still, he refuses to fade quietly. He moves from court to court, city to city, an aging comet trailing stories instead of light. In Spain, he tries his hand as a playwright, convinced his flair for dialogue will translate to the stage. The premiere ends in catastrophe. The audience boos, the critics sharpen their pens, and the actors forget their lines. He laughs it off, of course, bowing theatrically to his own failure. They only hate what they envy, he quips. Yet in private, you can almost feel him wincing. For the first time, his charm fails to protect him. Reputation, once a shield, begins to turn double-edged. Old enemies resurface: duelists, creditors, jealous husbands, and even priests who still remember that heretic from Venice. A pamphlet circulates mocking his aging appearance, calling him a philosopher of vanity. He responds by writing a counter-pamphlet mocking the pamphleteer's grammar. It sells better than the original. Rivalries, scandals, reinvention, it's his familiar cycle. But each repetition leaves a little less of him intact. One strange rumor spreads during this period that he dabbled again in alchemy and claimed to have found a formula for eternal youth. Historians still argue whether he truly conducted such experiments or simply enjoyed feeding the gossip mills. Either way, he understands the economy of myth. If the world insists you're extraordinary, give them a story worth paying for. He travels to Switzerland, where the air feels cleaner but the salons colder. Enlightenment thinkers now talk of revolutions, not romances. His witty aphorisms seem out of step with the new moral seriousness. Once, he was the future. Now, he's a charming anachronism. But Casanova never learned how to sit still. So he reinvents again, this time as a philosopher of pleasure. He writes essays defending laughter, love, and luxury as forms of human freedom. Reason may guide the mind, he says, but joy alone proves we are alive. A quirky tidbit from this era: while staying in Prague, he was invited to dinner with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. The two reportedly discussed Don Giovanni, a character often said to be inspired by Casanova himself. Legend has it he even advised Mozart on how to make the seducer more believable. Whether that's fact or fantasy, it's the kind of poetic overlap history loves, the real libertine whispering to his fictional shadow. But the years are catching him. His handwriting grows shaky, his laughter slower. A duel in Warsaw leaves him limping. He still writes love letters, though they're less flirtation than nostalgia, now memories wrapped in ink. His friends age, his patrons die, and the golden salons turn to smoke. Yet he persists, surviving on intellect, wit, and an almost comical refusal to surrender relevance. There's a haunting dignity in it. This man who once escaped prison now wrestling with time itself. He pens bitter essays against hypocrisy, especially the new moralists who preach virtue while indulging quietly in vice. They condemn the mirrors, he writes, because they fear their own reflection. The line earns applause in some circles, outrage in others. Perfect, exactly as he likes it. When debts close in once more, he accepts an unlikely position in Bohemia, serving as librarian to Count Waldstein at the remote castle of Dux. It's a strange twist of fate, Europe's great wanderer settling into the hush of dusty shelves. The man who once seduced queens now catalogs manuscripts. But you can tell he's not defeated. He's simply changing stages again. And somewhere between the silence of parchment and the echo of his own past, Casanova begins to write in earnest the great work that will finally capture the life he could never quite explain while living it. The castle at Dux feels like the end of the world. Fog hangs low over the Bohemian hills, the kind that seeps into stone and memory alike. You wander the long corridors with him, each echo of your steps swallowed by cold marble. Casanova, once the restless voyager of Europe, now moves through these halls as a reluctant ghost of his own legend. His new role as librarian to Count Waldstein seems almost absurd. The man who once dined with cardinals and flirted with duchesses now spends his days sorting musty manuscripts. The Count, aloof and pretentious, barely tolerates him. Servants whisper about the eccentric Italian who mutters to himself in the library. They say he's dangerous, or mad, or both. But what he truly is, at this point, is lonely. And yet this loneliness breeds something new, reflection. He begins to write again, this time not for applause or intrigue, but for himself. His hand trembles slightly as he dips the quill, but the words come steady. He writes Histoire de ma vie, the story of my life. It's sprawling, scandalous, melancholic, and tender. Page after page, he resurrects a Europe of carriages and candlelight, of masks and whispered confessions. He's not just recalling events. He's rebuilding a world he can never return to. Historians still argue whether he meant his memoirs as confession, satire, or self-defense. But you can feel the heartbeat beneath it. Every boast hides a bruise, every flirtation a flicker of fear that he was never truly loved. It's strange this man so infamous for pleasure now seems driven by longing rather than lust. Occasionally, guests pass through the castle. Some recognize him and treat him with awe, others with ridicule. One young visitor asks if the stories of his adventures are true. Casanova smirks. My dear boy, truth is what survives disbelief. It's a perfect answer, and the kind only a man at peace with myth can give. A quirky tidbit from these later years. He kept a pet raven that allegedly learned to mimic the laughter of women. He would talk to it for hours, amused and unsettled by the echo of lives long gone. The servants thought it witchcraft. Casanova called it companionship. The irony doesn't escape you. This creature of the sky is now caged, much like its master, outside. Revolutions simmer across Europe. The old order, the one he once danced through, is collapsing. The salons of Paris where he once traded flirtations now echo with revolutionary songs. Casanova reads about it all in newspapers, muttering at the irony. Libertines replaced by literal liberty. They have freed the world, he writes bitterly, but enslaved its imagination. And yet, even as his body weakens, his mind remains razor-sharp. He debates theology with priests, astronomy with scholars, and morality with anyone foolish enough to challenge him. Some find him insufferable. Others find him magnetic. Even in obscurity, he refuses to be ordinary. At night, he writes by candlelight, wrapped in a threadbare cloak, the quill scratching like rain on glass. He pauses often, stares at the flame, and smiles as if conversing with old ghosts. Henriette, the nun, the courtesans, the kings, the jailers, the gamblers, all of them crowd his pages, vivid and alive. You can almost feel his awareness that he's building something that will outlast him. If I must vanish, he notes, let my laughter remain. That's his quiet rebellion against mortality, not piety, not repentance, but remembrance. When he finally dies in 1798, the world barely notices. The newspapers ignore it. No public mourning, no grand eulogies, just the whisper of a name that once filled Europe with scandal and song. But the silence doesn't last. His manuscripts begin to travel smuggled, copied, and eventually published decades later. The world that once dismissed him now rediscovers him, this time as an artist, not a scandal. And as you close the heavy doors of ducks behind him, you realize he has outwitted even time itself. The body is gone, but the story, his favorite disguise, remains alive, still seducing readers across centuries. You linger now in the afterglow of his legend, wandering through time's dim corridors where the name Casanova has become both myth and mirror. Generations repeat it as shorthand for seduction, for charm, for reckless freedom, but few remember the man who carried it first. You can almost see him smirking at the irony, somewhere beyond the veil, delighted that even in death he still provokes conversation. The legend begins to blur. Artists paint him as a devil with a smile. Moralists cast him as a warning. Romantic poets claim him as a hero of feeling, while psychologists dissect him as a case study in appetite. Historians still argue whether he was a philosopher of pleasure or merely a compulsive wanderer, lost in his own reflection. But one thing is certain, Casanova refused to be simple. He made his own definitions, even if they changed by the hour. You can trace his fingerprints through culture, in Mozart's Don Giovanni, in Byron's restless verses, in every film and novel that dresses wit in silk and calls it love. Even the word Casanova itself, reshaped into an archetype, keeps seducing language. Somewhere, he's laughing because that, more than gold or glory, is the immortality he aimed for. A quirky tidbit for the dreamers, an early 19th century publisher claimed to have found lost chapters of his memoirs describing secret inventions, a machine to record dreams among them. Most scholars dismiss it as nonsense, but it fits too perfectly. You can almost imagine him writing that as a joke, knowing the world would argue about it for centuries. And if you listen closely, the myth still breathes. His story isn't really about conquest, it's about curiosity. Every affair, every adventure, every escape was a way of tasting existence more deeply. He lived as if the world were a mast to lift, not a rule to obey. I have loved women, he once wrote, but it is humanity I have desired. There's a strange nobility in that line, whispered through history's gossip. In the end, it's hard to tell where Giacomo ends and Casanova begins. Maybe that's the point. He turned life into theater and himself into the play. He lied sometimes, certainly, but his lies illuminated truths about longing, freedom, and the fragile comedy of being human. Even now, centuries later, his laughter feels closer than the candles that once lit his face. You might feel a quiet envy, or maybe just a sigh, the recognition that few people ever live so completely, so unafraid to contradict themselves. And maybe that's why we keep returning to him, not for the scandal, but for the courage to be everything at once. Now, as the night softens and the lights dim lower, let's drift gently toward the end of our story. You close your eyes and picture the canals of Venice, the faint lapping of water against stone. Somewhere, a gondolier hums an old tune, one Casanova might have heard long ago. The air carries that mingling scent of salt and memory, and for a moment you're floating halfway between dream and history. The world he knew has faded, yet its echoes remain. In the shuffle of cards at a casino, in a sudden laugh at a dinner table, in every risk taken for the sake of joy, you start to realize that his story wasn't about indulgence at all. It was about curiosity, the urge to see what lies beyond the next door, the next heart, the next idea. The rhythm of your breath slows with the water's pulse. The marble halls, the candlelight, the laughter, they blur into a soft haze. You feel that faint warmth of having traveled far, not through distance, but through centuries. And as your mind drifts further, the storyteller's voice grows gentle, almost a whisper. You probably won't survive this, he joked at the beginning, but here you are, surviving beautifully, lulled by the music of someone else's adventures. Venice fades into darkness. The ripples fade too. All that's left is the sound of quiet breathing, a heartbeat steady and sure. Casanova's laughter dissolves into the night airlight. Forgiving, free, you are safe now. Adrift in history's hush, knowing the story will be waiting whenever you wish to return. Sweet dreams.